got to get a few sips of tea.
Morning, everybody. Good to see you all, and happy to have a chance to be here with you on Saturday morning, as is often the case. So, I wanted to share with you one of the practices I've been doing recently is thinking of the body a little bit like a musical instrument. I didn't make up the analogy, but it's sort of a traditional analogy, but wanted to talk through that, explain how that works. And the basic idea is, just like a musical instrument is it's not us, but it's something that we can influence and control and cause to make beautiful music or horrific music, if you're not careful. So the body has its own way of generating positive feelings, positive states of mind that we can work with. So I'll explain that a little bit more, but we'll also touch on that in the meditation. So we can go ahead and get started as usual, just by finding a comfortable position. The basic instruction is having our back. Ideally, typically, if we want to meditate for a longer period of time and where there's any risk whatsoever of us falling asleep, then the instruction is to have our back straight but relaxed. So it's an interesting balance, straight but relaxed, and that was why I was thinking of architecture, these very tall buildings that need to be very straight, very strong, but also have a degree of flexibility, like a tree does. So, obviously in California here we have earthquake considerations and wind considerations, so there's a degree of flexibility, even though it's maybe subtle flexibility, similar to the way a tree does. So mostly we think of trees as hard, but actually they can be quite flexible as well. So this is the balance we're looking for in our body. So we can close our eyes if that helps us to reduce distractions. Take a deep breath in and out. And another deep breath. And in particular, we emphasize relaxation with this next deep breath. Our body can accumulate a lot of tension, so we just allow ourselves to breathe that out. And then we take another breath and just ask ourselves, what is important now? Even with just a few breaths like this, our feeling in our body can change a little bit. So just ask ourselves, is our body feeling differently at all now? Is our mind feeling differently at all now? And if there is any increased sense of relaxation, peace, or stillness, or calmness, we can just focus on this and just allow ourselves to enjoy that. It only takes a few breaths for us to find some greater inner peace, but it also only takes a few moments for us to lose that inner peace. If our mind becomes disturbed at all, we can recall this feeling of our breath. In particular, on the out breath, we relax a bit more. On the in breath, we open up, expand. expanding and relaxing. Focusing on any even small feeling of peace or well-being or relaxation. If it doesn't come, it doesn't matter, but if it manifests, we focus on this. If we were to think of our body as a musical instrument, like a violin, every time we move the bow along the strings, it can generate beautiful sound if we're skillful, or it generates a terrible sound if we're not skillful. But we can think every breath that flows through our body can generate some sense of well-being, some peace, if we're skillful. If it's not yet generating any experience of joy, or bliss, peace, doesn't matter. We can keep getting comfortable with this practice. But we take that as a good sign. If there's any relaxation, joy, peace, bliss arising, that all is a very good sign. You can just enjoy that. Every breath is a chance for us to return our attention, generate a sense of peace, relaxation, and joy. So if we find we've wandered off, just return to this experience. We can let our mind just drift and daydream. We can easily wander off into a world where we're worrying, tense, confused. Instead, we're focusing on the actual inner experience of peace, using our breath as a guide to keep us tethered to the present experience. Having practiced in this way, we can recognize that our opportunity to enjoy this peace and happiness comes from our human life. It comes from our parents, everyone else around us who has supported us throughout our life. And we generate a sense of gratitude. And we generate the intention that this brief time we have together, listening, meditating, contemplating, becomes a way of strengthening beneficial pathways within our mind that increase our capacity to repay the kindness of the world that has supported us. And then with this motivation, we can open our eyes and rise from meditation. So in that meditation, I introduced 3 different analogies. One of a building, architectural structure, another of a tree, another of a musical instrument. And so those are 3 very well-known, popular analogies for helping us to understand how to work with our own body and mind in meditation. They're not the only ones, lots of analogies, but those 3 have really stood the test of time, as we say. One of the things that is most conducive to learning is feedback. In fact, basically almost impossible, or probably impossible, to learn without some feedback. We try something. If it works, we do more of it. If it doesn't work, we do less of it. We do something, our teachers or someone else gives us feedback. No, that's not quite correct. So if you're learning a foreign language, you'll say something and people give you a puzzled expression, and that's a sign that you didn't say the right word. And then you ponder and think about, okay, what is the right word? And then you try something else and see if you get that positive facial expression that indicates you're on track. Some of the most powerful, so playing a musical instrument is famous for being a powerful way to really change your mind. Now, I'm not a person who's ever invested much time in playing a musical instrument. My knowledge is more theoretical. But one of the reasons why it's such a powerful learning experience, playing a musical instrument, is you get real-time feedback. Playing a violin, if you put the bow along the strings at slightly the wrong angle, or wrong pressure, wrong pace, whatever, you'll create horrible noises. And if you put it at just the right angle and pace and pressure and so forth, you'll create beautiful noises. And so that noise is your feedback that you're on track or off track. So even with building a building, right? Like, there is feedback, in a sense, between gravity and all of the forces made by the beams in the building and so forth. So it's instantaneous and automatic feedback. Wind instruments, yeah. That's the wind instrument analogy is also a perfect analogy for breathing meditation. Exactly. So stringed instruments, wind instruments, and so the body as a wind instrument is a beautiful analogy as well. So thank you. Yeah. If we're learning how to build a building, some of the feedback is just the structure, like how the weight conducts force through the beams that support it and into the ground, for example. And you can consider that a flow of force, a little bit like with a musical instrument. There's a flow of sound, and you can tell, is it making good sounds, bad sounds? With a structural, building an architectural structure, you can tell there's a flow of forces programming, this flow of logic and information. With architecture, for example, you might build a building, but then realize 20 years later when you have an earthquake that you did not build it in a way that was flexible enough to adapt to that situation. Now, why did you have that architectural failure? Because you didn't get feedback until 20 years after you built the building. And so when you have delayed feedback, it impedes our ability to learn. So people have had to learn through long, slow, painful experience many of the crafts that have built our society, like architecture and even musical techniques have evolved over the course of centuries. With our meditation, with our the reason these analogies are used with our meditation is for a couple of reasons. But one main reason is to begin to depersonalize this practice of meditation a little bit, because there's a strong sense like I am unpeaceful or I am peaceful, but it's very, very powerful to get a little bit of distance and just say, okay, the body itself is generating a peaceful feeling. The body itself is generating a sense of relaxation. Even getting some distance between ourself and the mind, this idea of the mind as not ourself, but something that we can watch and get to know. And so the essence of mindfulness is creating a little bit of a gap here between our body and between our mind. Now, what that implies with a musical instrument, for example, it implies that, because the musical instrument is not you, whether a wind instrument or a stringed instrument, it's the instrument itself that is making the noise. You are facilitating it, perhaps, but the instrument itself is vibrating and making the noise. So we are not the instrument, but we can get to know the instrument well enough to be able to work with it skillfully, work skillfully with that instrument to make it produce a beautiful noise. Now, the same holds true with our body and mind. We are not our body and mind. But we're also, in our case, we're also not separate from the body and mind. A bit subtle there. But we're not the body and mind. So we need to learn how to work with them skillfully. And the analogy also given of an animal, the body being like an animal, like an elephant or a horse that we're learning to tame. And when you're taming a wild animal, you have to realize it has an intention of its own. When you're working with a musical instrument, you have to realize that it has characteristics and tendencies of its own. And you've got to adapt your approach to the instrument, to the animal. If you're working with a person, you've got to adapt your approach to that person. So similarly, we need to adapt our approach to our own body and mind, and have some sensitivity to it, and recognize that we don't fully control it. That all we can do is to try to steer it. And when we say we, we're referring to this sense of self, this conscious sense of self that may normally live up in our head, but that really represents some minority of our body, minority of our mind and nervous system and so forth. So we're having to work with our own body. So when we're breathing in and out, normally the body just does it on its own. And when you fall asleep, you enter a deeply peaceful state where there's this natural sense of well-being, and in fact, even a sense of bliss that we don't often have while we're awake. But what we're trying to do is to learn how to restore this equilibrium, this inner equilibrium, restore a sense of relaxation. Now, there are times when we're awake that we feel like we're getting closer to that. And if you think back through your life, especially like your early young adult life or childhood, what were what were the activities, what were the situations where you felt the greatest sense of well-being? What were the things you most enjoyed doing? Um, what were the things that, when you were doing them, you felt like you were really on track, and you would have been happy to just keep doing that forever? Um, so, for all of us, things like eating ice cream is a nice thing. But of course, you can't keep doing that forever. But maybe, riding your bike or exercising. Some people love playing music. Some people love, you know, reading books. They just absorb and read a book. Some people love being at a party, talking with friends, right? Going to the beach. Oftentimes, I think if you trace back to your earliest experiences of really getting a sense of like bliss and joy and well-being and like you were on track, I believe that we tend to structure our life in such a way as to try to get back to those states, um, as often as we can or as best we can. So if you really liked, you know, creative drawing, then maybe you'll try to find a career where you can draw, or um, if you like reading, then you'll just try to carve out time to read. Maybe you'll even get into the book industry, something like that. But I've mentioned this before. If one of your first experiences of your life really being on track is taking drugs or alcohol, then that's gonna influence, how you guide your life. You're going to tend to come back to drugs and alcohol again and again and again to try to regain that sense of well-being. The problem with drugs and alcohol is not that they're no good; it's that they're a bit too good, and they get us addicted. They get us hypnotized, captivated, and drag us off in an unhealthy direction. So what we're trying to do is consciously create this sense of well-being, as if you were bottling it, as if you're able to recreate it at any point and return to that. And so the traditional instructions on meditation point out that as your mind becomes more still, more peaceful, you can get an experience of joy and bliss, in fact. And that is a sign that you're on track and something you can actually cultivate and try to nurture, encourage along, and take as some good sign. The point is that it's an effect, and the cause is a bit of discipline. And so you have to make sure that you come back to this discipline of paying attention to the breath and controlling our attention. But the result is some experience of joy and bliss. So it's very similar to when you play a musical instrument. There's a discipline involved. You've got to go through, you've got to do the work of practicing daily musical instrument. But the payoff is both creating a beautiful sound, but also that sense of enjoyment, that inner sense of being really on track, that inner sense of flow. When the experience of bliss and joy in meditation is so strong, or can be so strong, that people will gladly give up everything else in their life and just focus on that. A little bit similar to the way if someone gets addicted to a drug, they will stop eating even and abandon all kinds of other circumstances. But in this case, the problem with drugs is that the effect wears down over time, and also people tend to get into very self-destructive behaviors. But clearly there's something in our mind where if you're really experiencing some bliss, it is more powerful, more beneficial than anything else. So what we are trying to do is to find our bliss in a way that is conducive to our own health and well-being, and conducive to others' health and well-being, and conducive to harmony and peace and benefit in society. And so meditation provides a way of working with the body and mind, recognizing it as something a little bit separate from ourselves. So we can have patience with it, just like if you're, I was talking to somebody the other day about how if they get angry, they're now better at noticing that they're angry, but it still takes them a while for the anger to dissipate. So we don't have direct control over what's going on in our mind. It has a momentum of its own, some sort of life of its own, but we have some indirect control. We have indirect ability to begin to become aware of what's going on, reduce the duration, reduce the severity of our emotional outbreaks, so to speak. I find it helpful to recall that this body we have in fact inherited from our parents, and they've inherited from their parents, that in fact we've inherited all of humanity in this body. We've inherited humanity's incredible array, diversity of tendencies, good and bad and neutral. Right? So benevolent tendencies, homicidal tendencies to lie, tendencies to be honest and introspective and so forth. So all of that is converging in this life, which makes our human life an incredible combination of these factors that we don't necessarily have full control over. So our opportunity is to listen to what our body and mind is producing. That's the listening aspect of playing an instrument. But then also to begin to guide and to suggest and nudge and encourage our body in a direction of more peace. And so that is the active part of playing an instrument. And that's that feedback. You perform an action, blowing into a musical instrument, running a bow across the strings, but then you're getting the feedback through your ears. So when we're meditating, we're performing some subtle actions of, for example, inviting ourselves to relax, reminding ourselves to pay attention, but the feedback is coming in part through that feeling in our body, physical feeling in our body, including whether there's a feeling of relaxation, some feeling of joy. Bliss is certainly a very, very good sign. These signs are, just like even one note played beautifully on an instrument is a good sign, right? It's a sign indicating that there's nothing wrong with the instrument. So we are each, in a sense, like playing a Stradivarius, this perfect musical instrument. Our body is a perfect musical instrument, absolutely nothing wrong. It just takes some skill to figure out how to play it. And so the traditional explanation is not so much that people engage in good and bad actions, but that people engage in skillful or unskillful actions. Skillful actions are conducive to inner peace and happiness. Unskillful actions are conducive to, mental distress, torment, pain, so forth. So we can appreciate that the body we've inherited is not fully under our control. It's been inherited from our parents, from all of humanity, but that we are learning to work with this, and in particular, tuning it to get that sense of well-being. The final point, the Buddha made a traditional analogy to this, like tightening the strings of a lute. If you tighten the strings too tight, they can break or not. not make the right sound. If they're too loose, they won't make the right sound either. So there's a balance in the tuning and the tightening of each string. And that comes back to this idea that even with our posture, learning to have a posture, for example, that's straight, where our back is straight but relaxed, or upright but relaxed. And honestly, just those two words is that's kind of a lifetime's worth of exploration. Like, what is the right balance? Straight but relaxed, straight but relaxed, straight. Because at any given moment, you're generally either too straight or too relaxed, too straight or too relaxed. And like, you keep wondering, when am I going to get this posture right? But it, in a sense, just that practice of trying to find some right balance. Even when you're running the bow along the strings of a violin, what you're actually doing is increasing the pressure on that string, very, very slightly. So increasing the pressure slightly, some vibrations in the pressure. So what we're doing is we're learning to find that right balance physically and mentally as we go through our practice. So why don't we take a few minutes just in conclusion to let some of this settle in, and maybe having now a deeper appreciation for these analogies of our body as a musical instrument. Okay, so we return again just with one breath to reset. We notice that even in this short period of time, we may have accumulated some subtle tension. Just think how amazing, how quickly the mind changes. Another breath, inviting ourselves to relax. We notice when we breathe in, cooling air, expansion in our body. When we breathe out, relaxation, warming, contraction. And especially on this out breath, we may notice a tendency to relax. The in-breath, a tendency to expand, make sure our posture is open so we can fully take in air. Noticing any even slight sense of well-being, happiness, joy, bliss, peace in our body. I'm thinking this is like a beautiful sound. This is our feedback. We can think that through this practice, listening, meditating, today we've built these mental pathways, building an appreciation, deeper sense of respect for the power of meditation, the way our body and mind interact. We can think what good results would we like to see unfold from this, imagining what benefits for ourselves and others could unfold from this knowledge and familiarity. And then we can open our eyes from